The moment I realized I owned the financial backbone of the entire Sunset Palms Homeowners Association in Phoenix, Arizona, I experienced a satisfaction unlike anything I'd felt in my 34 years on this planet. My name is Ian Foster, and I just pulled off something that would make every harassed homeowner in America want to buy me a beer. Let me back up 6 months. I'd bought my first house in this upscale development, a beautiful 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a pool. The HOA seemed manageable at first, just basic rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. Then, I met Patricia Donnelly. Patricia was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with blonde hair cut in that aggressive bob that seems to be standard issue for her type. She showed up at my door 3 days after I moved in, clipboard in hand, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Foster, welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm just here to inform you that your mailbox is the wrong shade of black. Our approved color is midnight black, number 212810, and yours appears to be onyx, which is absolutely not permitted." I stared at her, genuinely confused. "They're both black." "Our standards exist for a reason," she snapped, her fake smile evaporating. "You have 7 days to repaint it, or you'll be fined $50 per day until compliance." That was just the beginning. Over the next 3 months, Patricia found reasons to fine me for everything imaginable. My trash cans were visible from the street for 45 minutes past the allowed window because I was stuck in traffic. $200 fine. My pool equipment made a humming noise that allegedly violated the noise ordinance, even though it was the same equipment every pool in the development used. $300 fine. I planted roses in my front yard without submitting a landscaping proposal in triplicate 14 days in advance. $500 fine. I wasn't alone. My neighbor, Rebecca Sullivan, a nice woman in her 60s, had been fined $8,000 over 2 years for various infractions, including having the wrong brand of roof shingles after a storm damaged her roof. Another neighbor, Marcus, was being fined daily because his teenage son's car was apparently the wrong color and violated some obscure covenant about vehicle aesthetics. The breaking point came when Patricia sent me a notice that my dog, a golden retriever named Charlie, was too loud and I was being fined $1,000. Charlie was the quietest dog I'd ever met. He barely barked. I'd had enough. I started doing research, deep research. I pulled every financial document I could find about the HOA, which were technically public records for homeowners. What I discovered was fascinating and deeply stupid on their part. The HOA had taken out a loan 5 years ago to build a community center and redo all the common area landscaping. They'd borrowed $1.2 million from a small regional lender called Desert Capital Partners. The loan terms were aggressive, with quarterly payments of $45,000 including interest. Those payments represented about 60% of the HOA's quarterly revenue from dues. Without that loan being serviced properly, the HOA would collapse financially. Here's where it got interesting. Desert Capital Partners had run into their own financial troubles during the recent economic uncertainty. They were selling off their debt portfolios to raise quick cash. I found this out through a former college roommate who worked in finance. He owed me a favor from when I'd let him stay rent-free in my apartment for 4 months after his divorce. "You want to buy what?" he asked when I called him. "Just check if that specific loan is in any of the portfolios they're selling," I said. "It's a commercial HOA loan, should be easy to identify." 2 weeks later, he called me back. "You're in luck and you're insane. Yes, it's in portfolio C12 that they're liquidating." They're selling it for 72 cents on the dollar. You'd need to buy the whole portfolio, though, not just one loan. I ran the numbers. The portfolio contained 12 loans totaling $4.3 million in outstanding principal. They wanted $3.1 million for it. I didn't have that kind of cash, but I knew someone who might be interested in a partnership. My older brother, Isaac, had made a fortune in tech and was always looking for alternative investments. I drove to his place in Scottsdale and laid out the plan. "So you want to buy a debt portfolio just to stick it to your HOA?" he asked, leaning back in his leather chair. "Not just to stick it to them," I said. "Look at the other loans in the portfolio. They're all performing, all solid. We'd make money on the whole thing." "But yes, the HOA loan gives us leverage to stop Patricia from her reign of terror." Isaac grinned. "I haven't seen you this fired up about something in years. Okay, I'm in, but I want 60% since I'm putting up most of the capital. Deal." We closed on the portfolio 3 weeks later. I'd borrowed against my 401k and liquidated my savings to put up $800,000. Isaac fronted the rest. We formed a small LLC called Foster Investment Holdings to manage it. The day the paperwork finalized, I printed out the loan documents showing that Foster Investment Holdings now owned the HOA's debt. I walked across the street to Patricia's house at 7 p.m. on a Friday and rang her doorbell. She opened it wearing a velour tracksuit, wine glass in hand. "Mr. Foster, if this is about your latest fine for having your garage door open past 8 p.m., you can submit your appeal in writing like everyone else." I handed her the folder. "This isn't about a fine. This is a courtesy notification that the HOA's loan has been sold to a new lender, and I'm the managing member of that lender. Your next quarterly payment of $45,000 is due in 3 weeks. Just wanted to make sure you're prepared." The color drained from her face as she opened the folder and scanned the documents. You can't. This has to be illegal." "It's completely legal. I suggest you consult with the HOA's attorney to confirm. Have a great evening, Patricia." I walked back home feeling lighter than I had in months. Charlie greeted me at the door, tail wagging, blissfully unaware that he'd been the catalyst for financial warfare. The phone started ringing the next morning at 6 a.m. I ignored it. By noon, I had 47 missed calls and 32 emails from various HOA board members. I responded to none of them. They'd been happy to ignore my appeals and concerns for months. They could wait. On Monday, I got a formal letter from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Richard Chen, requesting a meeting to discuss the loan terms and payment schedule. I agreed to meet that Wednesday at a coffee shop in neutral territory. Richard showed up with Patricia and 2 other board members, Susan Miller and David Park. They looked stressed. "Good. Mr. Foster, thank you for meeting with us," Richard began, his lawyer voice in full effect. "We'd like to discuss the terms of this loan and ensure a smooth transition of lenders." "The terms are the same as they were with Desert Capital," I said calmly. "Quarterly payments of $45,000, interest rate of 6.2%, remaining term of 8 years. Nothing's changed except who you write the check to." Patricia couldn't help herself. "This is a conflict of interest. You're a homeowner in the association. You can't be our creditor." "Actually, I can. I checked with my own attorney. There's nothing in Arizona law or in our HOA covenants that prevents a homeowner from holding the association's debt." "Richard, I'm sure you've confirmed the same." Richard nodded reluctantly. "He's correct. It's unusual but not illegal." "So what do you want?" Susan asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "Why did you do this?" I leaned forward. "I want the harassment to stop, not just for me, for everyone." Rebecca Sullivan shouldn't be drowning in fines because she used the wrong shingles during an emergency repair. Marcus's son should be able to park his car without daily penalties. And my dog, who barks maybe twice a month, shouldn't be labeled a nuisance. The rules exist for property values, Patricia said, her voice rising. If we let everyone do whatever they want, this neighborhood becomes worthless. The rules exist so you can feel powerful, I shot back. You've weaponized the HOA to bully people. That ends now. David, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. What exactly are you proposing? Here's what's going to happen, I said, pulling out a document I'd prepared. Every quarter before I accept your loan payment, we're going to have a meeting. At that meeting, you're going to present every fine issued in the previous 3 months. I'm going to review them. Any that I determine are ridiculous, vindictive, or violations of common sense get rescinded. You'll also implement a new appeals process where homeowners can challenge fines before an independent arbitrator, not just the board. That's absurd, Patricia sputtered. You can't dictate how we run the association. I'm not dictating how you run it. I'm setting conditions for accepting your loan payment. If you don't like it, you can pay off the loan in full right now. You have, about $800,000 in reserves, and you owe me just over $1 million, so you can't do it. Which means we negotiate every quarter or you default, and I foreclose on the association's assets, including that nice community center. The silence was beautiful. Richard cleared his throat. We'll need to discuss this with the full board and put it to a vote. You have 2 weeks until the payment is due, I said. Let me know. I left them sitting there, Patricia's face red with rage, the others looking shell-shocked. True to form, they waited until the last possible moment. The day before the payment was due, Richard called me. The board has voted to accept your terms on a provisional basis, he said. They want to schedule the first quarterly review meeting. Next Wednesday work for you? That's fine. We'll meet at the community center at 7 p.m. That first quarterly meeting was everything I'd hoped for. The entire 7-member board sat on one side of a conference table, and I sat on the other with my own attorney, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh who specialized in property law. Patricia presided over the meeting like she was facing a firing squad. They presented a report of all fines issued in the past quarter. There were 43 of them, totaling over $30,000. I went through each one methodically. Some were legitimate. A guy had painted his house bright purple without approval. That fine stood. Someone had built a large shed that violated setback requirements. That stood too, but there were so many that were pure garbage. A woman fined $500 because her teenage daughter's birthday party ended at 9:30 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. Rescinded. A man fined $300 because he was replacing his front door, and the old door was off the hinges for 6 hours during the work. Rescinded. A family fined $1,000 because their visiting relatives parked an RV on the street overnight. Rescinded. By the time I was done, I'd thrown out 26 of the 43 fines. This is ridiculous, Patricia said, her voice shaking with anger. You're undermining every standard we've established. I'm eliminating petty tyranny, I corrected. The reasonable rules stay, the power trips end. Susan actually looked relieved. I realized later that she'd been voting with Patricia out of fear, not conviction. David, too. They'd been as tired of the enforcement madness as everyone else. I accepted their check for $45,000. See you next quarter, I said. Word spread through the neighborhood fast. People I'd never spoken to before started thanking me in the grocery store, at the gas station, everywhere. Rebecca brought me a homemade pie. Marcus's son washed my car without being asked, but Patricia wasn't done. She started trying to find new ways to exert control that wouldn't show up on the fine reports. She sent nasty letters to homeowners, warning them about potential violations but not formally fining them, trying to intimidate without creating a paper trail I could review. I found out about it when Rebecca showed me a letter she'd received saying her mailbox was concerning and should be replaced voluntarily to avoid future action. The mailbox was fine. It was just Patricia being Patricia. I showed up at the next board meeting, which was open to homeowners. I wasn't on the agenda, but I didn't care. "I'd like to address something," I said during the public comment period. "It's come to my attention that warning letters are being sent to intimidate homeowners without formal fines being issued. I want to be clear. Any communication from the HOA that threatens action over alleged violations needs to be documented and will be reviewed in our quarterly meetings. Attempting to circumvent our agreement with intimidation tactics will result in me refusing to accept the loan payment until the issue is resolved." Patricia's face went purple. "You can't monitor our every communication." "Watch me," I said. "And homeowners, if you get one of these threatening letters, send me a copy. I'll deal with it." After that meeting, 3 people on the board approached me privately: Susan, David, and another member named Helen Torres. They asked to meet for coffee. "We want Patricia out," Susan said bluntly once we sat down. "She's been a nightmare for years, but she always gets re-elected because she runs unopposed and most people don't vote. Would you consider running for the board?" I hadn't expected that. "I don't know." "Wouldn't that create an even bigger conflict of interest?" "Maybe," Helen said. "But you'd have actual power to change things from the inside. And honestly, with you holding the loan, you've already got leverage. Might as well make it official." I thought about it for a few days and decided to go for it. Elections were in 3 months. I submitted my candidacy for HOA president. Patricia lost her mind. She sent out a neighborhood-wide email claiming I was engaged in a hostile takeover and had ulterior motives. She said I planned to bankrupt the HOA and buy everyone's houses at foreclosure prices. It was completely insane. I responded with my own email, laying out exactly what I'd done and why. I included statistics on the fines that had been issued before I took over the loan versus after. The numbers were stark. Fines were down 60%, and the ones that remained were for actual violations that affected property values or safety. I also pointed out that the HOA's finances were actually healthier now, because they weren't spending thousands on legal fees fighting homeowners who challenged bogus fines in court. The election wasn't even close. I won with 72% of the vote. Susan and Helen kept their seats. Patricia, David, and 2 of her allies were voted out. We had a completely new board. Patricia had to hand over all the HOA records and accounts. She did so with the grace of someone passing a kidney stone. At the final transition meeting, she glared at me across the table. "You've destroyed everything we built here," she said. "I've stopped you from treating your neighbors like subjects in your personal kingdom," I replied. "The neighborhood will be fine. Better, actually." She stormed out. I heard later that she put her house on the market within a week. With control of the board, I implemented real changes. We revised the covenants to eliminate the most absurd rules. No more restrictions on what brand of roof shingles you could use, just standards for color and quality. No more fines for having your garage door open during the day. No more paint color requirements that came down to specific manufacturer codes. We kept the important stuff. No junk cars on lawns. No structures that violated setbacks. No noise violations during quiet hours. The things that actually mattered for quality of life and property values. The independent arbitration process for fines became real. with a rotating panel of 3 homeowners reviewing any appeal. Fines had to be approved by a majority vote of the board, not just issued unilaterally by the president. But I still had the quarterly meetings with myself, which felt surreal. As HOA president, I'd present the fine report to myself as the loan holder. Jennifer thought it was hilarious. "You know you could just pay off the loan now that you control the HOA," she pointed out. "I could," I agreed, "but this arrangement keeps everyone honest. If a future board goes rogue, the loan holder has leverage to fix it. My brother and I are making money on the interest anyway. It works." About a year into my term as president, something unexpected happened. A homeowner named Tom Bradford came to me with a complaint about his neighbor, Sharon Mitchell. Her tree was dropping leaves into his pool and he wanted her to trim it. "Did you talk to Sharon?" I asked. "She says the tree is on her property and she doesn't have to do anything." "Is the tree healthy? Is it dangerous?" "No, it's just annoying." "Then she's right. It's her tree. You can trim any branches that hang over the property line, but you can't make her cut down or drastically trim a healthy tree on her property." Tom wasn't happy, but he accepted it. What struck me was how much I sounded like an HOA president handling a reasonable dispute. I'd become the thing I'd fought against, except I was trying to do it fairly. The second year brought a real crisis. The community center's air conditioning system died. It was old, had been barely functional for years, and replacement estimates came in at $80,000. We didn't have $80,000 in reserves after the previous board had depleted them with legal fees and unnecessary landscaping projects. We'd need to either levy a special assessment on all homeowners or take out another loan. I brought it to a neighborhood meeting and laid out the options. People were not thrilled about either choice. "What if we don't replace it?" someone asked. "Just close the community center." "Then we default on the loan covenants," I explained. "The loan requires us to maintain the community center in functional condition. If we don't, the loan holder can declare us in default." "But you're the loan holder," someone else pointed out. "Can't you just waive that requirement?" I exchanged a look with Jennifer, who was attending as HOA counsel. This was the ethical dilemma we discussed. "I could," I said slowly. "But that would be using my position as loan holder to benefit myself as a homeowner by avoiding an assessment. That's an actual conflict of interest and could expose me to liability. We need to do this right." We put it to a vote. The neighborhood chose a special assessment of $400 per household over taking on more debt. It wasn't popular, but people understood the necessity. Patricia, who still lived in the neighborhood but stayed out of HOA business, sent me an email afterward. It was surprisingly civil. "I disagreed with your methods, but I respect how you handled the AC situation. You could have taken the easy way out and didn't. That takes integrity." I wrote back thanking her. We'd never be friends, but maybe we'd reached a truce. The quarterly review meetings became routine. Most quarters, I'd rescind maybe 2 or 3 fines out of 20 or so. The new board was generally reasonable. We focused on real issues: maintenance, safety, community events. The HOA started feeling like what it was supposed to be: a tool for managing common interests, not a weapon for controlling neighbors. My brother Isaac asked me once if I regretted the whole thing. "You've sunk a lot of time and money into this," he said. "Was it worth it?" "Absolutely," I told him. I turned my neighborhood from a place where people were scared of their own HOA into a place where people actually like living. That matters. The loan had about 6 years left on it. The HOA was making payments on time, every quarter. I'd review the fines, rescind the unreasonable ones, accept the check, and life went on. Then in year 3, something happened that tested everything. A new family moved into the neighborhood, the Harrington family. Nice people, 2 kids, seemed normal. Then they started a major renovation on their house without submitting plans to the HOA. I got calls from multiple neighbors. The Harringtons were adding a second story to their ranch house. The construction was loud, started early, and the plans they'd filed with the city showed the addition would block sight lines and sunlight for 2 neighboring homes. I went to talk to James Harrington myself. "Hey, I'm Ian, HOA president," I said when he answered the door. "We need to talk about your renovation." "What about it?" he asked, not hostile but not friendly either. "You didn't submit plans to the HOA for approval. That's required in the covenants. I got city approval. That's all I legally need." "Legally, maybe. But you signed the HOA covenants when you bought the house. They require pre-approval for major exterior changes, and your addition is going to significantly impact your neighbors. Then they can deal with it," he said flatly. "I'm not stopping my renovation because some busybody neighbors don't like it." This was the moment. I could either be reasonable and weak, or I could enforce the rules and be the bad guy. I thought about all the times Patricia had overreached, all the petty fines for nonsense violations. But this wasn't nonsense. This was a major structural change that would genuinely affect other homeowners. This was exactly the kind of thing the HOA should regulate. "If you don't stop work and submit plans for approval, we'll fine you $1,000 per day and seek an injunction," I said. "I don't want to do that, but I will." He slammed the door in my face. The board met in emergency session. We voted to impose the fines and authorized Richard to file for an injunction. The first fine notice went out the next day. James Harrington sued the HOA and me personally, claiming we were violating his property rights. It went to court. The judge reviewed the covenants, the city permits, and the impact on neighbors. She ruled in our favor, upholding the fines and ordering work stopped until HOA approval was obtained. "The covenants are clear and were agreed to by the defendant at purchase," she said in her ruling. "The HOA is acting within its authority to enforce reasonable restrictions that protect all homeowners. James had to submit revised plans that reduce the impact on neighbors. We approved them with modifications. He wasn't happy, but he complied. The total fines came to $14,000, which he eventually paid. Some people in the neighborhood thought I'd been too harsh. Others thanked me for standing up to someone who was genuinely overreaching. I lost sleep over it, wondering if I'd become what I'd fought against. But then Rebecca reminded me of something. "Patricia would have fined him for having his trash cans in the wrong spot," she said. "You fined him for building something that would have hurt your neighbors." That's not the same thing. She was right. Intent mattered. Proportionality mattered. I wasn't wielding power for its own sake. I was using it to protect the community. The quarterly meetings with myself continued. Year 4, Year 5. The HOA stayed stable. Property values in Sunset Palms actually increased faster than comparable neighborhoods, which a real estate analyst told me was likely because we had rules that prevented chaos, but weren't so restrictive that people felt suffocated. In Year 5, something interesting happened. Another HOA in Phoenix, Crestview Heights, reached out to me. They were having problems with an out-of-control board and heard about what I'd done. Could I give them advice? I met with a group of their homeowners and walked them through it. They couldn't replicate exactly what I'd done, because their HOA didn't have a loan that could be purchased. But I helped them organize a recall election and draft new covenants that limited board power. After that, I got more requests. I started consulting with troubled HOAs across Arizona, helping them reform. It became almost a second job. I even thought about doing it full-time. "You could start a company," Isaac suggested. "HOA reform consulting. There's clearly a market." "Maybe," I said. after my term is up. I served 2 3-year terms as HOA president. By the end of year 6, the neighborhood was unrecognizable from when I'd moved in. We had community barbecues. People knew their neighbors. The Facebook group was full of people helping each other, not complaining about fines. When my second term ended, I didn't run again. Susan took over as president, and she was great at it. Fair, reasonable, focused on actual community building. The loan had 2 years left on it. I continued the quarterly reviews, but they were mostly formalities now. The fines issued were almost always legitimate. The system worked. In year 7, Patricia's house finally sold. New owners moved in, a young couple named Emma and Daniel. They came to introduce themselves, bringing cookies. "We heard about what you did with the HOA," Emma said. "That's actually why we bought here. We wanted a neighborhood with rules but not a dictatorship." That felt like validation. The loan was paid off in year 8, right on schedule. The final payment came with a letter from Susan thanking Foster Investment Holdings for being a fair and supportive lender. I had to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Isaac and I dissolved the LLC. We'd made about 18% return on the investment over 8 years, between the interest payments and the appreciation on the other loans in the portfolio we'd sold off. Not spectacular, but solid. "So what now?" Isaac asked over drinks at his place. "Back to being a regular homeowner." "I'm consulting with 3 HOAs right now," I said. "I think I'm going to do this for real, start a proper company. There are thousands of HOAs in this country that are dysfunctional. If I can help even a fraction of them, that's worth doing." I launched Foster HOA Solutions 6 months later. The business model was simple. I'd work with homeowners to analyze their HOA's governance, identify problems, and implement solutions. Sometimes that meant helping organize elections. Sometimes it meant mediating disputes. Sometimes it meant finding financial leverage like I'd done with my own HOA, though that was rare. The company took off faster than I expected. Turns out there's a massive market for helping people deal with HOA problems. I hired staff, including Jennifer as general counsel and Richard, who'd left his firm to specialize in HOA reform. We worked with over 200 HOAs in the first 3 years. Some situations were simple, just needed better communication and clearer rules. Others were nightmares, with boards that had been corrupt for decades, embezzling funds or running personal vendettas. The worst case we handled was in Tucson. The board president, a woman named Brenda, had been systematically fining a disabled veteran named Carlos for violations that didn't exist, trying to force him to sell his house cheap to her son. She'd racked up over $50,000 in fines against him over 2 years. We helped Carlos sue the HOA and Brenda personally. Discovery revealed she'd done this to 3 other homeowners. The court awarded damages. Brenda was removed from the board and criminally charged with fraud and extortion. She ended up pleading guilty and serving 18 months in prison. Carlos cried when the judge dismissed all the fines. "I thought I was going to lose my home," he said. "Thank you for fighting for me." That was why I did this work. Not for the money, though the company was profitable. For moments like that, back in Sunset Palms, life continued peacefully. I'd moved to a bigger house in the neighborhood, actually. Sold my original place and bought a 4-bedroom with a bigger yard for Charlie, who was getting older but still loved to swim in the pool. I'd started dating Emma Sullivan, Rebecca's granddaughter who'd moved to Phoenix for work. She thought the whole HOA saga was hilarious. "You're like a superhero, but instead of fighting crime, you fight annoying neighbors," she said. "Someone has to," I replied. We got married 2 years later. The reception was at the Sunset Palms Community Center, the same place where I'd held those quarterly meetings with myself. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Rebecca gave a toast. Ian came to this neighborhood and turned it from a place of fear into a place of community. He didn't do it by being loud or angry. He did it by being smart, fair, and unwilling to back down from bullies. We're lucky to have him. I looked around the room at all my neighbors, people who'd become genuine friends over the years, people who weren't afraid of their HOA anymore. People who understood that rules could be reasonable and communities could be governed fairly. Patricia was there, surprisingly. She'd stayed in Phoenix and we'd actually become cordial over the years. She came up to me at the reception. "Congratulations," she said. "You did good here, Ian." "Better than I did." "We all do our best with what we know," I said diplomatically. "Some of us do better than others," she replied with a slight smile. "Enjoy your marriage. Emma's a lucky woman." 10 years after I'd bought that debt portfolio, I stood in my backyard in Sunset Palms, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky orange and pink. Emma was inside cooking dinner. Charlie was napping under a tree, gray around the muzzle now but still my best friend. The HOA quarterly meeting minutes from Susan had come in my email earlier. 15 fines issued, all reasonable, all for actual violations. The neighborhood was thriving. Property values had increased 32% above the market rate for the area. Foster HOA Solutions had offices in 5 states now and had helped over 800 communities reform their governance. We'd trained mediators, developed model covenants, and even influenced state legislation on HOA oversight. But it all started here, with a ridiculous fine over a dog that barely barked and a refusal to accept that HOAs had to be tyrannical. It started with recognizing that sometimes the best way to fight power is to own it, literally. My phone rang. It was a homeowner from a development in Colorado, desperate for help with a board that was fining people for having the wrong color Christmas lights. I answered. "This is Ian Foster. Tell me what's going on." Because the work was never done. There were always more Patricias out there, always more homeowners who needed someone to stand up for common sense and fairness. But now, I knew exactly how to handle them. Sometimes with negotiation, sometimes with legal action, and sometimes, if you were really creative and had the resources, by buying the debt that funded their entire operation and making them negotiate with you every quarter. It wasn't the path I'd expected my life to take when I bought that first house in Sunset Palms, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. I'd found my purpose in the most unlikely place, fighting HOA tyranny one neighborhood at a time. The sun finished setting. Emma called me in for dinner. I took one last look at the peaceful street, at neighbors talking on their lawns without fear of fines, at kids playing basketball without worrying about noise violations. This was what community was supposed to look like. And I'd helped make it happen, starting with one very satisfying debt purchase and a whole lot of quarterly negotiations. Charlie followed me inside, tail wagging slowly. Life was good. The HOA was fair. And somewhere out there, another Patricia was probably writing up a fine for someone's mailbox being the wrong shade of black. But now there were people like me, ready to fight back. And we were winning, one neighborhood at a time.